And I said that I was going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I may get into that a little bit more, but I wanted to share two more stories because these videos do tend to get long. So hopefully I can keep them short. And if you liked it, if you want to hear more like Uber stories and my experience as an Uber driver, definitely please leave it below and I'll make some more. Like I mentioned in the first video, I actually got the experience to meet people from all walks of life, women in tech. I talk about that in my first video. I also got to meet women in the sex industry, and there was women who were strippers, there were women who were escorts. I didn't have a big conversation with them. It was kind of just our day to day, like what life was like for them. And I didn't want to be, I did ask a lot of questions. I talked about openness and vulnerability and just letting myself be open and vulnerable. But when it came to people who were sex workers, I didn't pry too much because I felt like if they wanted to share or they wanted to talk, I would just let them because of the type of work that they're doing. I just didn't want to be intrusive and I didn't want to cross boundaries with them. But I actually enjoyed them. One of the women who was an escort, like she was such a sweetheart. We just talked about life and her moving from another state to Los Angeles and kind of like how that was with her. And yes, I know there were escorts because they opened up a bit about that. But again, there's not a lot that I can go into that. The reason that I mention it is because I did talk about openness and vulnerability and me asking a lot of questions. But you also have to keep in mind the type of work that women do and kind of just respecting those boundaries. And the way that I respected them and allowed them to just be in my car and just be themselves and feel safe, which I also did for a lot of people. My car became like my home. If you're invited to my home, you're going to feel safe, you're going to feel welcomed. And that's kind of the attitude that I took when I was driving. Anyone that came into my car, I wanted to make sure that they felt safe. I wanted to make sure that we had a great conversation, whether that was a conversation or just shared a nice silent ride. There was even sometimes, especially I feel for women, being a woman driver, I always wanted to create that sense of safety. Whenever I picked up a woman at 2 in the morning from a place and she was by herself, I was just they were happy to see me and I was happy to see them because I know that many times it doesn't feel safe for women late at night, or say that they've been out drinking and then get in a car with a stranger. I know that they felt safer because they saw I was a woman. They always said so, that they were really glad that I was a woman. And I always made sure that when I got them to their house that they got in, and were safe, got into their door. And I don't know, I think that was in part the mother in me wanting to get women home safe, and also me having a daughter, just making sure that people were getting home safe. One thing that I would mention is that I mentioned to you guys that my daughter had gone to college, and as a parent, it is really hard when your child leaves home because you just want to make sure they're safe. And I actually gave a lot of rides to college students, and I got to talk to them and their experience starting college, starting, this whole new life in the world. And it allowed me to do like this mothering and talking to them. And it also allowed me to get their perspective of them going out into the world and a lot of the pressures that they had, that they felt like they didn't want to let their parents down. They felt a lot of pressure to do really well and get these really high profile degrees, and me talking to them and kind of giving their perspective that what I really wanted for my daughter was first and foremost to do what she wanted to do, to be happy and to be okay with changing her career or her major if she really wanted to. That ultimately their parents, number one, wanted them to be safe, but also wanted them to be happy. And for me, one of the biggest things is that I want my child to be at peace more than anything, because peace means making the decision ultimately that's going to make you happy, that you're going to feel fulfilled. So that was another thing that I got from being an Uber driver, was kind of coming to terms a lot with what was going on in my life and speaking to the other side of the perspective, being from my daughter or from a man's perspective, or from a CEO's perspective. Just so many perspectives that I got, and at the end of the day, all of us were struggling with the same thing. We were going through transitions. We were trying to figure out what it is we wanted now. We were in conflict with either, what was going on in our relationships or at home or anything like that. So I was in a beautiful position to be able to be dealing with different people all of the time and seeing a lot of those similarities. And so today I wanted to talk about two rides that were in particular kind of stuck to me. And one of them was this woman. I remember she was tall, blonde, and gorgeous. And I was giving her a ride to the airport. And again, it was like every time someone got in, it was either they were my mom, they were like a girlfriend, they were like a best friend. I just really always had some great connections. And I remember that we were talking and she started opening up about an issue of dealing with domestic violence. And I want to talk about this one in particular, especially if you are someone who's younger, what social media can do to people when we see people and think that they have it so good, right? We're on Instagram or, we're seeing these people live my accent almost came through, live these like amazing photo perfect lives, but we really don't know what's going on the other side. And so she talked about how if you went to her Instagram with her ex, that you would have thought they were the perfect couple. They traveled, they had money, they were attractive. And she said how it was all BS, because in the background in the backdrop, she had eating issues. She was in a physically violent relationship. They were unhappy. It was unhealthy. It took her so long to get out of it. And all the meanwhile, she's posting all these BS pictures and being this big old lie. And she didn't know how to ultimately get out of that. And she just wished people really knew that what you see on Instagram, TikTok, whatever it is that you may think looks perfect and great and your relationship goals, that you should really not idolize or hold those things that you see in such high regard, because you really don't know what is happening behind the scenes. She would even go as far as to say the more perfect or beautiful or aesthetically pleasing something looks, the background of that is probably so far from it, because that's how she was. She said the uglier and the worse her relationship got, the better the pictures, the destination, the looks, the body got, because she was trying so hard to hide what was really going on inside of her and in her life, that the pictures just needed to be absolutely perfect. And she said that when you're in those industries, that you already know what to give people, right? You already know what people are looking after. And that's part of the danger too, right? That we're seeing these things and we're going there to make ourselves feel better, or to have some reference to go to because maybe we're not so happy in our lives. Not realizing that with all relationships, you don't really know what's going on. And she just really opened up a lot of dealing with domestic violence, with eating issues, and as a woman myself, and having relationships that I'm not so proud of, and the mistakes that I did, and also again being a mother and just kind of holding that space for her, was really beautiful to be able to share something with someone and get their perspective, and just have that behind the scenes look of what social media and just kind of these filtered photos, not just filtering ourselves, right, but also filtering our lives, because as much as we're looking for someone for inspiration, the person in it who's, filtering and making these photos, they're looking for that too. And there's this pressure to continue to be that, even if that is not really your truth. And she found it really difficult to get out of that because of this lie that she had been selling for so long. And one of the things that I love, that I always thought was so funny, and was that when I would drop people off at the airport, because we would share so much, I'd drop them off and then I'd get a big hug, like I knew them forever. And I remember dropping her off and she's like, "Can I give you a hug?" And I'm like, "Sure." And that was one of the many, many hugs that I got on. Always, I was at least once a day, I was giving a ride to the airport, if not many times over and over. And every time that I dropped someone off, I would give them a big ol' hug, because we had just exchanged so much, so raw and so open, that we had created this intimacy, and that maybe we didn't even have with our own families, with our own friends, right? Because there was not this perspective or this idea or this box that we kind of put our family, our friends, and ourselves, right? We can just be this unfiltered and raw and open. And it was really beautiful. So I was so appreciative of her. And that's just something I wanted to share, because I think what she's given us is such a gift, that whenever we're struggling or we're in our worst and we're looking to other people, to pictures, to lives, to kind of inspire us, or tell ourselves that that's goals for us, is that we really don't know what the person behind that is really going through, and that they have their own struggles and their own things that they're going through. So that was one of the things that was really memorable. And the hug and the connection with her, super sweet. And every time I think about everyone that I shared that very difficult time, because they didn't know that I had a breakdown, they didn't know that I was going through a depression, listening to them and their stories and what they had overcome and gone through, especially when it came to this woman, all she had gone through. She just had her hair up in a bun and she just looks so happy and at peace now. I was so appreciative, because it really did show me how dark things can get and how it can really be on the other side once you allow yourself to have that peace. And I keep saying vulnerability, because a lot of those conversations centered around being vulnerable and ultimately, being open, but ultimately getting to that place of having peace. And the second and final story, before I get to the ugly, this woman that really changed everything for me. And she was this older woman. I want to say she was in her 60s, and that's only because she told me about her children's ages and what she had gone through. But she was absolutely beautiful. She was this older lady, but she didn't look her age. And she had a lot of sun damage, and that's, I came to find out, is because she had been living in the streets for 20 years. She had been homeless, and when I picked her up, there was a man had run up to her and given her some keys, and she's like, "I keep forgetting that I have keys." And I'm like, "Oh, why is that? Is it a new place?" Or, I had no idea. And she's like, "No, mija," she was Mexican, and she, which was, I found so sweet, because when someone calls you mija, it's just, I don't know, it just makes you feel like you're 12 all over again. She's like, "No, dear," in Spanish. She's like, "I was actually homeless for 20 years, and I've never had a key. So I don't think to lock the door and I need my key." She's like, "I just kind of close the door and go." And she's like, "I'm in this shelter that helps you to transition out of homelessness, and I keep forgetting my key. I constantly leave it on there, or I just forget to close the door." And I was like, wow. And so I asked her, I said, do you mind me asking, why were you homeless? And she's like, no, I don't mind. She's like, and I think of my first question is like, what was it like to be homeless? And she said, you're dealing with a lot of the elements. I don't know if you noticed. She's like, but I obviously been out in the sun too much. She goes, that's because there's no shelter to stay away from the sun sometimes. So you're in the sun all the time. Something we don't really think about, right? Like what shelter means really. It's not just about a home, but like the protection of the elements, right? Maybe here in Southern California, we don't have a lot of changing weather, but there's definitely like a lot of sun. And so then I said, oh, and she's like, yeah, she's like out in the sun. She's like, for women, it's really dangerous, obviously. She's like, because out here on the streets, there's these groups, we all know each other, it's a whole culture out here. And men are very aggressive. If they like you, you're theirs. And she's like, and you need their protection because men, you know, like provide this protection from women. If out on the street, again, she's like, we all know each other. There's this culture. There's this like unwritten rules. If you're with so and so, then no one else can like really mess with you. She goes, but that also puts you in a position that this, man is hurting you. He's violent. You're like his possession, and you need to do certain things to gain that protection. And she's like, and if you decide to leave him, then other men like want to like possess you and, own you and like that kind of thing. She's also, I had to deal with a lot of that. And I said, what finally, after 20 years, made you like finally just want to like be out of that, and that you never wanted not to be like unhoused, because she was a vet. So she had been in the military, and in the military, if you're unhoused, there's like different kind of programs. And she had mentioned that. She's like, yeah, she's obviously, she's like, I had some drug issues, and being in the military, I had a lot of trauma from the military. She's like, just one day, she's like, I just got tired of it. And I just didn't want to do it anymore. She's also, what I did is that I just made a decision that I didn't want to be homeless anymore. That there was this like, I was going to get myself in those programs and kind of like get on their list to like start preparing myself to like not be unhoused. I had that opportunity because I had served my country and I was a vet. And I wanted to like really get out of this. And she goes, and the first thing I did, she's like, when you're homeless, she goes, I don't know if you noticed, she goes, but we're so unseen. We're so dehumanized. People shush us away. She's like, we're flies or something. People don't acknowledge us, whether it's because they just, don't like that we're homeless, or they feel like, we're a burden or whatever, or other, people's guilt and shame of not being able to help us, and they feel like they don't know how to help us. So they ultimately like look away kind of thing. And she's like, so what I decided, so it's easy to fall into like nothingness when you're unhoused. She's like, so what I decided is that I was going to be seen. I was going to start to say hi to people, even if they said hi to me or not. Even if they acknowledged me, I was just going to start saying, hi, how are you doing? And just start greeting people. And she's like, and that was just my first step. I was going to show up and I was going to be seen. And she's like, so I just started talking to people and saying hi to them. And she goes, and again, people wouldn't say anything. She goes, but some people did. I would say, hey, good morning, and people are like, hey, good morning, how are you? And she's like, and good afternoon, and how are you, and have a nice day. And she's like, that did so much for me, whether people talk to me or not. She goes, but it was great when people did. I started feeling more like a human being, more like I was in the space, more like I was part of society. And when people talk to me, like it just did so much for me. It started like doing so much for my why can't I think of it? Oh, my self-esteem. And she goes, and so that was the start of me moving out of that. It was just one small step of feeling like I mattered, like feeling like a human, of wanting to show up and get out of that space of nothingness, of homelessness, but like showing up for myself and then interacting with other people. And she's like, and then ultimately, not doing I just got tired of doing drugs. I got tired of living on the street and I wanted to take accountability. And ultimately, she's like, I think I can't really remember if it took a year or something for her to finally, get on that list and get into this like housing, and for her to start working out of that. And she also, when you're in that program, they put you in like AA, and like, they help you obviously to get clean and like get to steps to transitioning out of like the homeless shelter, and then they get you into a homeless shelter, and then they get you into like these apartments, but you gotta stick with this program. And so for her, sticking with saying good morning, how are you doing, and anything like that was the way of her keeping herself accountable. So I thought that was such a beautiful step into like getting out of homelessness. And so when she told me that, and I like started getting emotional again, I made it a point to start saying hi to people. Not that I like ignored or whatever, but honestly, I feel like I could have been more intentional, and so I started making a point that if anyone at house like said hi to me or anything like that, that I was gonna say, hi, how are you? That I was gonna greet people when I passed people on the street that were at house. I was gonna say good morning. I was gonna say, hey, how are you? And because I know how much that did for her, and I know that I needed that too. I needed to acknowledge people, and I think my part was like feeling overwhelmed sometimes, or like not being sure. And when she said that, I'm like, you know what? That could be her, right? That when we say hi to people, just in general in all walks of life, like that could be her. She could be reaching out for that human connection and that acknowledgement, right? And we can be doing that for each other, right? And so after she told me that, I started making sure that I did. And I remember I had been on a date, and like we had gone for like met up for breakfast date. And so like we were walking, and there was like, there was unhoused people, and like sitting down, and I was just like, hey, good morning, how are you? And they were just kind of like, some people were like surprised, and the person I went on a date was just like kind of like, I'm like, oh, that's nice, and I'm just like, why is it nice to say good morning to people who are in our house? People are people, and we should acknowledge them, and just because maybe we're overwhelmed because we don't know how to help, the small thing that we can do is to help people feel like human beings, and not to feel dismissed, and not to feel ignored, because it's hard for us to handle. And so when she told me that, I after that, I was like, I'm gonna make it a point to say hi to people and acknowledge people that are in house and say good morning. And the same thing goes, like she said, if they say good morning, great, and if they don't, I just want to make sure that I'm acknowledging people from now on, because it's crazy how acknowledging and hi, hello, how are you? Like what a difference that made in her life. And I also went on to ask her, what led to her being unhoused. And she told me that she had dealt with so much in her life. In the military, she had experienced rape. She had told a commanding officer, and she was dismissed. And ultimately, like, I won't get too into it because I know this could be triggering for people. But that was one of her examples, that she had dealt with something so horrible that the doctor told her that she probably would never have kids. And she did end up going to get married and actually having, I believe she had 3 kids. And she said, everything, I had my kids, I had my home, but ultimately, your kids grow up and they have their own lives. And one of her sons was wrongfully accused and sent to prison. And she's like, and after that happened, she's like, something happened with me. She's like, I just stopped caring. Like, when my son got accused of this crime that he didn't commit, and all of the evidence was showing that he wasn't, and none of us thought that he would get convicted because the evidence was there. But ultimately, I think we know in these systems there's breakdowns and things happen. She goes, so he went to prison wrongfully accused. And she's like, something clicked with everything that I had dealt in my life, with the military dismissing me, with, things happening in my life that, throughout my childhood. She's like, that was it. She's like, I don't know what happened, but when my son got accused and went to prison wrongfully, she's like, I lost it. She's like, and I left my home. And she's like, and I became homeless. And my children would go and look for me. She goes, but I just didn't want to. She's like, I don't know. It was just years and years of things piling up and me not dealing with them. And ultimately, she's like, there was something that just snapped and I was homeless. She goes, and it ended up being 20 years of me being homeless on drugs and not being able to handle things. And she's like, and now it's me deciding, to start, that I was just tired of it. I was tired of feeling sorry for myself. I was tired that this happened to my son. I was tired that I was a disappointment to my other children, to my husband, to my family. I was tired of dealing with even worse things out in the street and the elements and addiction. And she's like, I just, she goes, that's how it can happen. From one moment, something snapped and I was homeless. And from the other moment, something clicked and I decided that I was done. She goes, and now there's this programs and I'm seeing a psychologist and I'm seeing, getting help with my addiction and I have a place to stay. She goes, so many things can happen in our lives and it doesn't happen overnight. She's like, me being unhoused didn't happen overnight, right? It was years of abuse and trauma, and this thing with my son was the last straw, and it was years of being unhoused and not dealing with my things, and like for me to finally get to a point of being tired of it, and it was time for me to deal with all of it. She was getting help and she was working towards something, and that just kind of made me realize so many things of how we're such in a popcorn society, right? It's like even all these YouTube videos have like leveling up and micro habits and change your life in 6 months and in a year you can turn it around and like all of this stuff, which you can, but like life doesn't work that way sometimes. People deal with heavy stuff throughout their lives, and 6 months in a year is not going to change that. You're aesthetically maybe working out, whatever, the outside may look a certain way, but there's a lot of things that may take years to heal and may take years to finally go and get the help that you need. That's certainly something that happened to me being young, being a single mom, all of this stuff, my depression, identity loss. And I'm saying all that to say, from these examples of all these Uber rides, is that everything doesn't happen or heal overnight, that things do take years sometimes, but that's also to say that it can happen in one moment, you can snap, and in another moment, things can click. So that so much and so many lessons from from that woman and that conversation. I was in the car with her for like an hour. And when I got out, people would always ask me for a hug, but I asked her if it was okay to give her a hug. And she's like, yeah. She was like so sweet, gave me a big old hug. And it was just, it felt like your mom in a big hug. And I told her how grateful I was for her opening up and being so open with me about her journey, and me being able to share it with you guys, because it was just such an incredible eye-opening story to have her in my car and just have this like amazing conversation with her. I've been talking for a while, so this video is probably going to be long. I did want to talk a little bit of things, the ugly, and try to make that as quickly as possible. Someone did have some of the things you do. Someone threw up in my car twice. And although you get paid, you still like have to stop working. So not the best. And that's if you work nights and, you know, people are going out. And so I stopped working nights on Fridays and Saturdays because of that. Someone did have their period in my car, so I needed to get that clean. Not good. I definitely had 2 guys jump in my car because people are, you know, getting out of the bar, getting ready to go home, clubs, whatever. And these 2 guys jumped in my car, and I said, this isn't your car, because I for some reason I saw the photo. I said, this isn't your car, get out. And they're like, oh, well, can't you take us? And I said, if you don't get out of my car, I'm going to start yelling bloody murder, because so many people are getting out. So there was a lot of people around. It wasn't like I was in the alley or off and these 2 guys, right? And so, like I said, if you don't get out, I'm going to yell bloody murder. They jumped out of the car so fast after I said that. But I was really scared, because here's these 2 guys in my car who I'm not their ride, right? So heaven forbid anything happens. The good thing is, like, again, there was a lot of people around me. The windows were open, but I was just like, please get the heck out of my car. So that was scary. One of the things as a woman Uber driver that people are like, aren't you scared? You drive this night. Like, I never let fear stop me from doing things, but that doesn't mean that I didn't listen to my intuition when it came to who I was giving a ride. One thing I never did was question my intuition. I never second guessed it. If I pulled up, no matter what this person looked like, whatever, they can look like the sweetest little tiny woman, whatever. If my intuition said don't pick them up, I didn't pick them up. And I didn't care. I like canceled the ride. I kept going. I only did that like 3 times though. There was only 4 times where I was like, no, not picking them up. Nope. And I didn't care. I never second guessed myself on that. If my intuition told me not tonight, I didn't drive that night. Maybe not this hour, I didn't do it. Anything that my intuition said not to do, I never second guessed it. And that's how I stayed safe. I'm not saying that if anything happens or you're not listening, I am in no way discrediting anybody's intuition or saying, you know, I'm just telling you my experience and how I was able to drive for 2 years and stay safe. That doesn't mean that every situation was always ideal. But I know that listening to my intuition, my gut about who to give a ride to, what nights I was supposed to go out, that's what helped me. Again, I'm not saying that that's going to help you or that anything's happened to you, is because I'm not saying any of that. What really helped me is ultimately just listen to your gut, listen to your intuition, especially when you're a woman, because, you know, we just really have to be careful out there. And also being assertive, you know, telling people like, no, I told one guy that got in the car, something about him, I don't know what it was. He sat in the car and I was like, get out. And he's like, are you serious? I'm like, yeah, get out of the car now. And he's just like, okay. And he got out of the car. And again, not any way he looked. There's no like specific way they looked, did, or anything like that. It was just a feeling. Like, he got in the car next to me, and when I pulled up, it was fine. It was just he got in and sat down, and I was like, something was like off, and I was like, get out. He was like, seriously? Because even me, I was like, and he's not doing it. Like, there was nothing, but something said, tell him to get out of your car. And I was like, get out of the car. And he got out, and that was that. So that was something that ultimately, like, for me, was just really listening to, like, what my higher self, my intuition was telling me when it came to safety. And I had this, like, funny experience, like, haha, but at the same time, like, listen, no. There was these two women that were really drunk, got in the car, and we were by Skid Row. So Skid Row is an area of Los Angeles where a lot of, like, unhoused people live. And it's also a dead zone. I don't know if people know that. It's like a dead zone. Sometimes you don't get cell service. So it's in between, like, there's Skid Row, and then there's also, like, the Arts District. There's just, like, a certain section. And I didn't go over there because, like, you don't get service, so I never really get a call from over there. So I got a call. I saw there was a woman. I'm like, oh, she's, like, in a dead zone. So I'm going to go pick her up. So I went, and when they were about to get in the car, one of the women, like, they were extremely intoxicated. So they were lost. They were, like, completely lost. They couldn't get service. And then at one point they got service. So anyway, one of the women, like, is getting in the car. She's like, it smells in here. And I was like, it didn't smell like that until you got in here. And her friend started laughing so hard because I kept my car clean. And what she was smelling was how intoxicated and how bad they smelled, because that's how drunk they were. And they got in the car, and she's like, well, whatever. And she gets in the car, and I was like, we'll see how this ride goes, you know? And so she continued to, like, say stuff. And I said, listen, this is a dead zone. I said, if I hear one more word from you, I'm going to pull over, get you out of the car, and good luck trying to get another driver. And her friend goes in, and she's like, no. Please don't leave us here. It took us forever. We don't know where we're at. Please don't leave us here. She won't say anything. If you want, you could kick her out. Just please take me home. I'm like, what a great friend you are. So that was, like, funny for the rest of the ride because I had to take them to Beverly Hills. If you know, you know. If you live in LA and you deal with people from Beverly Hills, and you know what I'm talking about. Anyways, she didn't say not a word at the rest. And I was serious. I told them, I was like, listen, you give me any kind of lip, I will pull over on the freeway and have you both get out. Like, I'm not playing with either of you. And that's kind of how it came to be, where I just wasn't putting up with people's mess anymore. So that was one funny, somewhat annoying. I definitely dealt with sexism. There was definitely some men that were bothered, and I was told that I shouldn't be, working Uber. It's so dangerous for me. And, like, just a lot of, like, passive aggressive comments, men telling me how to drive, that I didn't know how to follow directions, that didn't I know there was a left coming up. But I will say, to other men's credit, that when there were men who were acting out of pocket and saying, sexist stuff, there were some men who would call them out on it. They would tell them, please don't talk to her like that. Why don't you mind your business? She's not your girlfriend, wife, sister, whatever. They would get upset with them and just have, like, a conversation with them. They would apologize to me. So I was grateful for those moments. Obviously, I wasn't being defended all the time. There was just 2 times that I was appreciative, because I mean, at a certain point I was like, whatever, they're just ignorant. And then I just got to a point, I'm like, if, I would pull over and tell them to get out, that they can get a male driver if they're not happy. And ultimately, they would apologize and then, like, get out of the car. And you just get to a point where you realize that you don't have to put up with people's sexist, racist comments. I got asked so many times where I was from. They were like, oh, I hear an accent, like, where are you from? And I would just continue to say, I'm from San Diego. And then they would be like, no, but, like, where are you really from? I'm like, San Diego. No, but, like, San Diego. And then they would eventually, like, feel stupid and just shut up. But I got asked many, many times and told, like, where's your accent from, and like what part of Mexico are you from, or what kind of whatever Latin American country, but mostly obviously Mexico. And I would just continue to, like be like, I'm from San Diego, because yes, I'm Mexican. Yes, I was born in Mexico, but I wasn't gonna answer people's ignorant comment because I know why they were really asking. So I just will leave it at that. And you do deal with things like that. You do deal with people who are angry and upset and like just want to take it out on you. But I just got to a point where I wasn't putting up with people's BS. And ultimately, it's my car, it's my business. And so if I don't want to deal with you, I'm just going to pull over and ask you to get out, really fast. I mean, I would check people, and like with that woman, like, I said something to her, like I get snappy like that with people, but then ultimately I'm like, I'm not gonna put my energy or like have it, like meet you where you're at and say something to you, cut you down for what? It's not good for me at the end of it. Maybe I embarrassed them or said something, or called them, but like, I'm not gonna like have my job be that. Like have to be on alert and have to call people's racist or sexist comments or rude comments, or they're having a bad day. I'm just like gonna ask you to get out of the car. And I say all that to say that I gave over 2,000 rides, and I want to, ultimately it was just 1%. Ultimate people, like, yes, people are having a bad day, nobody's perfect, and there was like these rides that weren't the best, but ultimately people, I feel, are good people just having a bad day. And those people, life happens. I'm human, I have my days, but there's that like 99%, right? I feel people are out here trying to do the best they can, but that 1% of people who are just in a dark place, and they're, you don't have to deal with those people. I certainly didn't, and I wasn't gonna meet them where they were at. I was just gonna tell them to get out of the car. And that's ultimately what I started doing, was telling people to exit the vehicle real quick, because I'm not putting up with their BS, their comments or whatever is going on. So the more I got comfortable being okay with not having to deal with people and not having them take it out on me, the better it was for me. And the better rides and the better people I got. And again, was I always the happiest, go lucky and open and no. I had my own stuff going on too, and that's why I was able to give people grace in situations that may have been humiliating or like, not the best, because I know that I wasn't always at my best. And I know that I had my regrets of how I talked to people or snap back or whatever. So ultimately I felt like I had to give people grace, as long as obviously we're not dealing with sexist, racist, and things like that. But, and even in those moments too, because when you're an Uber driver, like, you also invisible. Like, if it's more than one person, you're invisible. And people say things in car rides because they like ultimately think you're not there or you're not listening. But I would hear horrible things that people were going through. So when they were being sexist or racist or just whatever they were being, I didn't take it that personal anymore. I was like, wow, your life is absolutely horrible. Things that happened to you were absolutely horrible. Like, I don't even have to say anything to you. Life is already taking care of you. Like, you're having these like horrible things happen to you in your life, and like you're deciding to take it out or whatever, but like life is already taking care of you. So I hope that that helps you keep in mind that when people are being nasty or doing like horrible things, it's because their life is already horrible. Like, life is already taking care of of people who are out here not putting out the best in the world of themselves. So that was another lesson I learned while being an Uber driver and dealing with like thousands of people, is that ultimately you think like oh, people do horrible things and nothing happens to them, or people are always winning and they're not the best or whatever. Like, trust me, life is ultimately they said something to you and whatever, but that's their whole life. Like, their whole life is that they're giving out, and the universe is giving it to them 24/7. And if you can like give people grace and like just get out of their way right when they're coming at you and just be like, you'll start to see that life and the universe is taking care of them without you needing to be bothered, without you needing to snap back. Like, I heard so many stories of people going through absolutely horrible things happening to them, betrayal, disloyalty, lies, all this stuff, and I'm just like, man, life is really like throwing you all over the place, huh? And if I just had a bad moment with you, anyway, I say all that to say that karma, and just watch what you put out, because ultimately it always comes back to you. But I'm going to end it here. This video is super long. If you have any questions, if any experience, this has been like the good, the bad, and the ugly. I've had many more beautiful, heartwarming, touching stories being an Uber driver, but I just wanted to share what my experience has been as being an Uber driver and a woman, and just learning so many things for thousands of people, which is insane to say. But ultimately, I think maybe this is something you've heard before. When I was working in Los Angeles and giving people rides, it really did feel like we are all in this together. We're all trying to hustle. We're all trying to, ultimately get to our dream. We're all trying. That's just how LA felt to me. And I felt very connected to all people, all aspects of life. I feel like Los Angeles is very human. It's got so many layers, ugly, beautiful parts, like stuff we're maybe ashamed of or guilty, regret. Like, it's just so human. And the thing that we all have in common is that ultimately I feel we're all trying to do the best we can with what we've been given, and we're looking to one another to help inspire us, to share moments. We're all really lonely and feel isolated sometimes, and we want that connection and we want to feel seen. And that's ultimately what I got from those rides. People who would just share their stories, and I had things in common, and realizing that we're all kind of going through our own thing, but we share this moment and our lessons. It was just these beautiful connections and conversations, even if it's a shared moment with a stranger. And so I'm so grateful, because all of those people, good or bad, helped me ultimately to get out of my depression and my isolation by allowing me to see inside their life, if even from a 5 minute to an hour and something ride. So thanks for listening.